I switched my cheating husband's lube with glue. His screams woke the whole street. When I cleaned my husband's car, I found a tube of lubricant under the seat. I said nothing, just quietly replaced it with industrial glue. What happened then made the neighbors call an ambulance. I'm so thrilled you're here with me today. If you're watching this, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I need to know how far this story of justice has traveled. Drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. Are you team revenge or team forgiveness? I'm genuinely curious to see where my supporters are around the world. Now, let me tell you exactly how I discovered my husband's betrayal, because I thought I was just being a good wife cleaning his car, but what I found under that seat made my blood run cold. It was a Saturday morning in October, one of those crisp autumn days where you can actually enjoy being outside. I remember the exact date, October 14th, because it's the day my 15-year marriage died, even though it would take 3 more weeks for the funeral. I was in my favorite weekend outfit, old jeans, a Northwestern University sweatshirt from my college days, and my hair pulled back in a messy bun. You know that feeling when you're just trying to be productive on a lazy Saturday? That's exactly where I was mentally. David had left early for his golf game with clients, or so he claimed, and I decided to surprise him by detailing his precious BMW. That silver sedan was his baby, his pride and joy. He spent more time polishing that car than he'd spent talking to me in the past 6 months. The morning sun was hitting the driveway just right, casting long shadows from our oak tree across the concrete. I had all my supplies laid out like a little army: bucket of soapy water, microfiber cloths, vacuum cleaner, Armor All for the dashboard. I was actually humming, can you believe that? Humming some old Taylor Swift song while I scrubbed the love of my life's car, completely oblivious to what I was about to uncover. I started with the exterior, working my way around methodically. Rinse, soap, scrub, rinse again. The neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind, out there at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, but honestly, I liked the routine. Made me feel useful. After years of David telling me I didn't need to work, that he made enough money for both of us, these little acts of service were how I showed my love. How pathetic is that? After 45 minutes, the car was gleaming. That's when I decided to tackle the interior. I opened the driver's side door and immediately noticed how the leather seats had that lived-in look. More lived-in than they should have been for someone who claimed to only drive to the office and back. But I pushed that thought away. I was being paranoid, right? I started with the dashboard, wiping down every surface until it shone. Then the cup holders, sticky with what looked like lipstick residue. Weird, since I rarely wore makeup anymore and never ate in his car. But again, I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe he'd given a colleague a ride? Maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there? Then I moved to the floor mats. That's when I plugged in my handheld vacuum and started working on the seats. I always clean thoroughly, under the seats and the cracks between the cushions. David used to joke that I was more thorough than a forensics team. If only he'd remembered that joke before he decided to betray me. I was bent over, vacuum hose in hand, working my way under the driver's seat when my fingers brushed against something that definitely didn't belong there. Something small, cylindrical, hidden way back against the seat rail where you'd never find it unless you were really cleaning. My heart didn't race immediately. First, I was just curious. What could David have dropped under there? Maybe it was chapstick or some kind of medication that had rolled away. I maneuvered my hand back there, trying to grab whatever it was without having to completely contort myself. When I finally pulled it out and saw what I was holding, the world tilted. A tube of personal lubricant. Not just any lubricant, the expensive kind, the kind that comes in discreet packaging, the kind you buy when you're planning something special. I stared at that tube for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. My brain was working overtime, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. At first, there was this tiny flicker of hope. Maybe David had bought this for us? Maybe he was planning to surprise me, to rekindle our intimacy that had been non-existent for the past 8 months? But then reality crashed over me like ice water. We hadn't been intimate in 8 months. Not since last February when he started staying late at the office, when he started taking those mysterious phone calls in the garage, when he started looking at me like I was a roommate instead of his wife. This tube wasn't for me. Couldn't be for me. My hands started shaking. Actually shaking like I was freezing, but the sun was warm on my back and I was wearing a sweatshirt. Tube felt heavy in my palm, heavier than something that small had any right to feel. It was like holding evidence of my own irrelevance. That's when the nausea hit. Sharp and sudden, starting in my stomach and rising up through my chest into my throat. I had to grip the car door to keep from falling over. 'Cause in that moment, everything clicked into place with horrible, crystal-clear certainty. The late nights. The distance. The way he'd started showering immediately when he came home. The new cologne. The secretive phone calls. The fact that he'd been doing laundry himself lately, something he'd never done in our entire marriage. And Maria. Our housekeeper Maria, with her perfect figure and her flirty laugh and her way of being just a little too comfortable around my husband. I stood there in my driveway, holding proof of my husband's infidelity, and I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart that had been cracking for months. This was something deeper. My trust, my faith, my belief in the life we'd built together. But you know what? Even in that moment of devastation, even as tears started burning behind my eyes, I didn't scream. I didn't throw the tube at his precious car. I didn't call him and demand explanations. Instead, I did something much more dangerous. I got very, very quiet. And I started planning. But before I tell you about my revenge, you need to understand who I was before that moment. You need to know what David threw away, what he betrayed, what he destroyed with his selfishness. Because the woman standing in that driveway wasn't just some random wife. I was his everything. At least I thought I was. 15 years. 15 beautiful years I gave that man, and I gave them willingly, joyfully, completely. We met in college, Northwestern University, both of us studying business. I was going to be a marketing executive. Had big dreams, you know? Corner office, power suits, business trips to Europe. I was 22 and hungry for success, ready to take on the world. David was charming back then. So charming. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room, like your dreams mattered, like your opinions were gold. When he proposed 3 years later, I said yes before he even finished asking. I was so in love, so sure we'd conquer life together. Those early marriage years were magical. We were both working, both climbing our respective ladders. I landed a position at a prestigious marketing firm downtown, and David got hired at an investment company. We had this tiny apartment in Lincoln Park, and we were so happy. Poor but happy. We'd cook dinner together, talk about our days, plan our future. He used to say I was his secret weapon, his good luck charm. Then his career started taking off. Really taking off. Promotions, bonuses, bigger clients. And somewhere around year 7, he suggested maybe I didn't need to work so hard anymore. Why stress yourself out with office politics and deadlines, he'd say. I'm making enough for both of us now. First, I resisted. My career mattered to me. But David was persuasive, and honestly, the marketing world was brutal. 12-hour days, backstabbing colleagues, clients who treated you like garbage. When David got his next big promotion and we could afford the house in Wilmette, the decision felt easy. So I quit. Not permanently, I thought. Just temporarily. Just until we figured out the next phase of our lives. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of being the perfect corporate wife. 8 years of managing his schedule, hosting dinner parties for his colleagues, making sure his shirts were pressed and his favorite meals were waiting when he came home. 8 years of sublimating my dreams so his could flourish. And I was good at it. Really good. I turned our home into a showcase, our social life into a networking goldmine. I researched his clients before dinner parties so I could make intelligent conversation. I learned about wine so I could select the perfect bottles for entertaining. I even took cooking classes so I could prepare restaurant-quality meals. David's colleagues used to tell him how lucky he was. "Your wife is incredible," they'd say. "She remembers everyone's names, asks about their kids, makes everyone feel welcome." I became known as the hostess who could turn any gathering into magic. But somewhere in the last 2 years, things started shifting. David began working later and later. Those dinner parties I'd planned so carefully, he'd cancel at the last minute. "Client emergency," he'd say. "You understand, right, honey?" I always understood. That was my job, wasn't it? To understand, to support, to be flexible. The intimacy disappeared gradually, so slowly I almost didn't notice at first. Date nights became rare, then non-existent. Conversations became logistical rather than emotional. "Did you pay the electric bill?" instead of "How was your day?" Quick pecks on the cheek instead of real kisses. I told myself it was normal. Marriage evolves, right? Through 15 years, passion naturally settles into comfortable routine. That's what all the magazine articles said. That's what my mother had always told me about long marriages. But then came the phone calls he'd take in other rooms. The sudden interest in going to the gym. The new cologne that definitely wasn't the one I'd been buying him for Christmas every year. The way he'd check his phone constantly during dinner, then claim it was just work stuff. 6 months ago, when I suggested hiring a housekeeper to help me maintain our large home, David was surprisingly enthusiastic about the idea. "Great thinking, honey," he'd said. "You deserve some help around here." That's how Maria entered our lives. Maria Santos, 28 years old, with those curves that motherhood had somehow enhanced rather than diminished, and that musical laugh that seemed to brighten whatever room she entered. She was efficient, thorough, and spoke English with just enough of an accent to sound exotic rather than foreign. I liked her immediately. How stupid was that? I actually liked the woman who was stealing my husband. She came 3 times a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Always professional, always courteous. She'd arrive at 10 in the morning and work until 3 in the afternoon. Perfect schedule, I thought, since David was always at the office during those hours. Except apparently, he wasn't always at the office during those hours. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The way Maria started wearing nicer clothes to clean house. The designer handbag she carried, way beyond what I was paying her. The expensive jewelry that appeared on her wrists and around her neck. When I complimented her new bracelet, she'd blush and say it was a gift from her boyfriend. She never mentioned his name, never brought him up in conversation. And David. Oh, David started taking longer lunch breaks. Started mentioning errands he needed to run in the middle of the day. Started coming home smelling like different soap, different shampoo. Started doing his own laundry, claiming he wanted to be more helpful around the house. I should have known. A woman's intuition is rarely wrong, is it? But I'd spent 8 years being the trusting wife, the supportive wife, the wife who never questioned or suspected or demanded explanations. I'd trained myself not to see problems, not to rock boats, not to be the kind of wife who checked up on her husband. Even when I found the credit card receipts. Even when I noticed the hotel charges on days when he claimed to be at the office. Even when I discovered he'd been buying gifts I never received, making purchases at stores I'd never been to. I made excuses for all of it. Client meetings at hotels. Gifts for colleagues' wives. Business expenses that looked personal. Because that's what perfect wives do, isn't it? We trust. We believe. We give the benefit of the doubt until the very last moment, until the evidence is so overwhelming that denial becomes impossible. Standing in my driveway that Saturday morning, holding that tube of lubricant, I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. Playing house with a man who'd checked out of our marriage months ago. Maybe years ago. All those meals I'd cooked with love. All those shirts I'd ironed with care. All those parties I'd hosted to advance his career. All those dreams I'd abandoned to support his success. For what? So he could sneak around with our housekeeper in his car? So he could use our driveway, our home, our life as the backdrop for his betrayal? In that moment, I understood something crucial about myself. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was furious. Absolutely furious. And fury, I was about to discover, was a much more useful emotion than heartbreak. But that fury didn't make me reckless. Oh no. It made me methodical. It made me careful. It made me pay attention to every single detail I'd been ignoring for months. You see, when you're suspicious, really suspicious for the first time in your marriage, you start noticing everything differently. Things that seemed innocent before suddenly take on sinister meaning. Patterns emerge from what you thought was random chaos. The very next Monday morning, when Maria arrived for her regular cleaning day, I watched her like I'd never watched her before. And what I saw made my stomach turn. She was wearing a Tiffany bracelet. Not the kind of jewelry you buy yourself on a housekeeper's salary. The kind of jewelry that comes in those distinctive blue boxes, the kind that costs more than most people make in a month. When she reached up to dust the high shelves, her sleeve rode up, and there it was, gleaming silver with that unmistakable craftsmanship. My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "That's such a beautiful bracelet, Maria. Special occasion." She blushed immediately, tugging her sleeve down. "Thank you, Mrs. Richardson. It was a gift from my boyfriend." Her boyfriend. The mysterious boyfriend she'd been mentioning for months but never named, never described, never brought around. The boyfriend who apparently had excellent taste and deep pockets. "He must really care about you," I said, forcing a smile. "Tiffany isn't cheap." The way she looked away, the way her hands trembled slightly as she continued dusting, it told me everything I needed to know. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not until I had all the pieces. That afternoon, after Maria left, I did something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. I went through David's pockets. His suit jacket was hanging in our bedroom closet, and my hands were shaking as I searched through every pocket. In the inside breast pocket, I found a receipt from Tiffany & Company, dated just last week, for a sterling silver bracelet with a heart charm. The exact bracelet Maria had been wearing. The receipt showed a purchase amount that made me dizzy. $800. $800 for jewelry for another woman, while he'd given me a gift card to Target for my last birthday. But that wasn't all I found. In his wallet, tucked behind his credit cards, was a small folded piece of paper. When I unfolded it, I found Maria's phone number written in David's handwriting, along with a note that made my blood boil. Wednesday 1 p.m. usual spot. Wednesday. Maria's cleaning day. The day David had started taking those mysterious long lunches. I sat on our bed, staring at that piece of paper, and felt something inside me crystallize. This wasn't just an affair. This was a carefully orchestrated deception, happening right under my nose in my own home on my own schedule. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own marriage. I started paying attention to everything: David's schedule, Maria's behavior, the smallest changes in our routine. I noticed that David's business trips had a pattern. Every time Maria requested a day off, claiming family obligations or doctor appointments, David would suddenly have an out-of-town client meeting. Correlation was too perfect to be coincidence. I started checking our credit card statements online, something I'd never bothered with before. David handled all our finances. I trusted him completely. What a fool I'd been. The statements told a story that made me physically sick. Hotel charges in the city on days when he was supposed to be at the office. Dinner receipts from restaurants we'd never been to together. Purchases from Victoria's Secret, expensive lingerie that had never made it into my dresser drawers. There was a jewelry store charge from 3 months ago, the same day Maria had shown up wearing new diamond earrings. There was a charge from a high-end boutique the day before she'd arrived in a designer dress I'd complimented but couldn't afford myself. He was buying her a wardrobe. A whole life. While I was at home, washing his shirts and planning dinner parties to advance his career. The most damaging evidence came from his phone bill. I'd never looked at the detailed statements before, but now I studied every number, every call, every text. There it was, Maria's number, appearing dozens of times throughout each month. Calls during work hours, texts late at night, conversations that lasted 30 or 40 minutes. On days when he claimed to be in back-to-back meetings, he was actually spending hours on the phone with her. On evenings when he said he was too tired to talk to me, he was having marathon conversations with our housekeeper. But the behavior changes were what really convinced me. The way they acted when they were in the same room started to make perfect sense once I knew what I was looking for. They never made eye contact when I was around. Never. Maria would keep her head down, focusing intently on her cleaning, while David would suddenly become fascinated with his phone or newspaper. If I entered a room where they both were, the energy would shift immediately. Tension would fill the air like smoke. I started testing them. Little experiments to confirm my suspicions. One Wednesday, I announced I was going grocery shopping but instead parked around the corner and walked back to peek through our kitchen window. David's car was in the driveway. He was supposed to be at the office. Through the window, I could see them standing close together near the kitchen island. Too close. David's hand was on Maria's waist, and she was looking up at him with an expression I recognized because it used to be reserved for me. When I returned from my fake shopping trip 20 minutes later, David was gone and Maria was frantically cleaning the kitchen counters that had already been spotless. "Where did Mr. Richardson go?" I asked casually. "I thought I saw his car in the driveway." Maria's face went pale. He stopped by to get some papers from his office. Just for a minute. Very quick. But David's home office was upstairs and she'd been cleaning the kitchen. The papers story didn't make sense and we both knew it. Another time, I pretended to be sick and stayed home on one of Maria's cleaning days. I told David that morning, mentioned I'd be resting in bed all day. Suddenly, his schedule cleared. No client meetings, no important calls. He worked from home that day, something he rarely did. Maria barely cleaned at all. She kept finding reasons to go upstairs to check if I needed anything, to dust the bedroom furniture. She was nervous, jumpy, constantly looking toward David's office. The sexual tension in the house was so thick I could practically taste it. By the end of those 2 weeks, I had a mountain of evidence. Receipts, phone records, behavioral patterns, lies that didn't add up. But I still needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed that final, undeniable proof. Because once I had it, once I was absolutely certain, I was going to destroy them both. And I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. The final confirmation came on a Wednesday in November, exactly 3 weeks after I'd found that tube of lubricant. I'd been planning this moment for days, waiting for the perfect opportunity to catch them in the act. That morning, I told David I was driving to my sister's house in Milwaukee for the day. "Girl time," I said with a bright smile. "We're going shopping and then lunch. I probably won't be back until evening." David's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That sounds wonderful, honey. You deserve a break. Take your time, enjoy yourself." The eagerness in his voice made me want to vomit. But I kept smiling, kept playing the part of the oblivious wife heading out for a harmless day with family. I loaded my purse into my car, backed out of the driveway, and drove around the corner to our neighbor's house. Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, was a widow who spent most of her day watching soap operas and had always been friendly. When I knocked on her door and explained that I wanted to surprise David with something special but needed to watch the house without being seen, she was more than happy to help. "You can sit right here in my breakfast nook," she said, leading me to a window with a perfect view of our driveway. "What kind of surprise are you planning?" If she only knew. From Mrs. Patterson's kitchen window, I had a clear view of our entire front yard. I could see David's BMW, our front door, and most importantly, the driveway where I suspected they'd been meeting. At exactly 11:47 a.m., Maria's beat-up Honda pulled into our driveway. She was 23 minutes early for her usual noon arrival. My heart started hammering in my chest. She walked to our front door like she owned the place, using her key with casual confidence. She was wearing a tight black dress that definitely wasn't appropriate for house cleaning, and those diamond earrings David had apparently bought her. Her hair was styled, her makeup perfect. This wasn't a woman coming to work. This was a woman coming to a date. 12:15 p.m. David's BMW pulled into the driveway. My husband, who was supposed to be in meetings until at least 2 o'clock, who'd kissed me goodbye that morning and told me to have fun with my sister, was pulling into our driveway in the middle of a workday. But he didn't get out of the car immediately. Instead, he sat there for a few minutes, checking his phone, looking around the neighborhood, making sure the coast was clear, making sure his wife wasn't home to catch him betraying their marriage in broad daylight. Then Maria came out of our house. She practically skipped down our front walkway, her hips swaying in that black dress, a smile on her face that I'd never seen before. Pure anticipation. Sexual excitement. The look of a woman about to be satisfied by someone else's husband. David got out of his car and they embraced right there in our driveway. Not a friendly hug, not a professional greeting. A passionate, hungry embrace that made my stomach turn inside out. His hands were on her waist, her arms around his neck, and they were kissing like teenagers. In our driveway. Where our neighbors could see. Where I could see. The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer disrespect was beyond comprehension. This wasn't just an affair happening in some seedy motel. This was my husband flaunting his betrayal in the home we'd built together, on the property we'd bought together, using the life I'd helped him create as the backdrop for his infidelity. They got into his car together, David in the driver's seat, Maria sliding into the passenger side. And then my worst fears were confirmed. They didn't drive away. They stayed right there in our driveway in his precious BMW that I'd been cleaning just weeks before. From Mrs. Patterson's window, I could see the car rocking slightly. I could see shadows moving inside. I could see my 15-year marriage being desecrated in real time, 20 yards from where I was sitting. The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't the sharp anger you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic or the irritation of a rude cashier. This was molten fury, the kind that burns through your chest and makes your vision go white around the edges. They were using our driveway like a drive-in motel. They were having sex in his car while parked in front of our house, the house I'd turned into a home, the house where I'd hosted dinner parties and Christmas celebrations and anniversary dinners. And the car cleaning supplies. The bucket I'd used just last Saturday was still sitting in our garage, 20 feet away from where they were betraying me. The microfiber cloths I'd used to lovingly detail that same BMW were folded neatly on a shelf, waiting for the next time I decided to surprise my cheating husband with a clean car. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I'd been cleaning the very location of their affair. I'd been polishing the surfaces they were using to betray me. Mrs. Patterson, bless her, had gone to make tea and missed the whole show. She had no idea that the surprise I was planning involved industrial adhesive and revenge. As I sat there watching, my mind was racing through possibilities. I could march out there right now, pound on the car windows, drag Maria out by her perfectly styled hair and demand explanations. I could call the police and report trespassing. I could take photos and send them to David's boss, destroy his career the way he'd destroyed our marriage. But something deeper, smarter, more calculating was taking over my thoughts. If I confronted them now, they'd just deny everything. They'd make excuses, tell lies, gaslight me into thinking I was seeing things that weren't there. David was a master manipulator. He'd been lying to my face for months. He'd find a way to turn this around, make me the villain, make me the crazy wife who didn't trust her husband. And Maria would quit, disappear, and I'd never get my revenge on her. They'd just be more careful, sneakier, better at hiding their affair. No way. Absolutely no way. I wanted more than just the satisfaction of catching them. I wanted consequences. Real consequences. Public humiliation. The kind of justice that would make them both regret the day they decided to betray me in my own driveway. Through what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, they finally separated. Maria got out first, smoothing down her black dress, checking her hair in the car's side mirror. David followed, adjusting his tie, running his hands through his hair. They kissed again, quick and furtive this time, like guilty teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. Then Maria walked back into our house, presumably to do whatever minimal cleaning would support the lie that she'd been working all day. David got back in his car and drove away, probably heading back to the office to continue his charade of the devoted husband who works hard to support his family. I sat in Mrs. Patterson's kitchen for another hour, letting my rage crystallize into something more useful, something more dangerous. By the time I thanked Mrs. Patterson and walked back to my car, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to give them the chance to lie or make excuses or turn the tables on me. I was going to let them think they were safe. Let them think their secret was secure. Let them continue their disgusting affair in David's precious car. And then I was going to make sure they never forgot the lesson I was about to teach them. The hunt was over. Now it was time for the trap. That night, while David was in the shower washing off the scent of his betrayal, I sat at my laptop researching industrial adhesives like I was studying for a master's degree in chemistry. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was focused, methodical. I had a mission, and I was going to execute it with the same precision I'd once brought to marketing campaigns and dinner party planning. The internet is a wonderful resource when you're planning revenge. Did you know there are entire forums dedicated to discussing the fastest-acting construction adhesives? Did you know you can compare viscosity, drying times, and bonding strength with just a few clicks? I spent 3 hours that night learning everything I could about adhesive products that might look similar to personal lubricant. Consistency had to match perfectly. Color had to be identical. Most importantly, it had to work fast enough to create the consequences David and Maria deserved. After extensive research, I found exactly what I needed: ProBond industrial construction adhesive. Fast-acting, clear, and with a texture that was remarkably similar to the lubricant I'd found in David's car. According to the reviews, it bonded skin in under 30 seconds and required medical intervention to separate. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. But I couldn't just walk into Home Depot and buy industrial adhesive without raising suspicions. David knew everyone in our small suburban community, and gossip traveled fast. Word got back to him that his wife was purchasing construction supplies. He might start asking questions. That's when I remembered Sarah Mitchell. Sarah lived 2 streets over and had become my closest friend during the 8 years I'd been a stay-at-home wife. She was divorced, independent, and had absolutely zero tolerance for cheating men after her own ex-husband's affair had destroyed their marriage 5 years earlier. More importantly, Sarah worked in construction management. She had legitimate reasons to purchase industrial adhesives, and she had access to supplies that regular consumers couldn't buy. The next morning, after David left for his office and his secret rendezvous, I walked over to Sarah's house with a bottle of wine and a story that would ensure her complete cooperation. "Sarah, I need your help with something," I said, settling into her kitchen with my wine glass. "And it involves making my cheating husband pay for what he's done." Sarah's eyes lit up immediately. She'd been waiting for this conversation for months, she told me later. She'd suspected David's affair long before I'd figured it out, but she'd been waiting for me to see the truth myself. "Tell me everything," she said, pouring herself a generous glass of wine. "And then tell me exactly how you want to destroy him." I explained the entire situation. The lubricant discovery, the evidence gathering, catching them in our driveway. Sarah's face grew darker with each detail, her jaw tightening with familiar rage. "That bastard," she said when I finished. "That absolute bastard. And in your own driveway? The nerve is unbelievable." Then I told her about my plan. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Then she started laughing. Not gentle laughter, but the kind of deep, satisfied laughter that comes from knowing justice is about to be served. You want me to get you Pro-Bond construction adhesive, she said. The kind that bonds permanently on contact. The exact kind, I confirmed. I need it to look identical to personal lubricant, and I need enough to replace what's in David's tube completely. Sarah was already reaching for her purse. I have some in my garage right now. Left over from a job site last month. Consider it a divorce gift. We spent the next hour comparing the adhesive to the lubricant tube I'd brought from David's car. The consistency was remarkably similar, the color was perfect, and the packaging would be easy to replicate. But Sarah had an even better idea. We don't need to replicate packaging, she said, holding up both tubes. We can carefully empty the original tube and refill it with the adhesive. That way everything looks exactly the same. David will never suspect anything until it's way too late. The next step required surgical precision. Using a small syringe Sarah had from her medical supplies, she was also a part-time EMT, we carefully extracted every drop of lubricant from David's tube and replaced it with the industrial adhesive. Process took almost 2 hours. We worked slowly, methodically, making sure not to leave any residue or evidence of tampering. When we were finished, the tube looked exactly as it had when I'd first discovered it under David's car seat. How fast does this stuff work? I asked, holding the doctored tube up to the light. According to the specifications, skin contact creates an irreversible bond within 15 to 20 seconds, Sarah said with grim satisfaction. They'll need medical intervention to separate. Emergency room intervention. The implications hit both of us at the same time, and we looked at each other with expressions that were equal parts horror and satisfaction. They'll be stuck together, I said quietly. Actually stuck together. In a very compromising position, Sarah added. In his car. In your driveway. Where anyone could see them. Poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe. David and Maria, who had been using my home as the backdrop for their betrayal, were about to learn exactly what it felt like to be exposed, vulnerable, and completely helpless. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, her voice gentle but serious. Once you put this back in his car, there's no taking it back. This is going to create consequences that will follow both of them for the rest of their lives. I thought about 15 years of marriage. I thought about the career I'd sacrificed, the dreams I'd abandoned, the trust I'd given unconditionally. I thought about David kissing Maria in our driveway while I was supposed to be visiting my sister. I thought about them having sex in his car 20 yards from the home I'd created for us. They made their choice, I said, my voice steady and cold. Now they get to live with the consequences. That afternoon, while Maria was cleaning our house and David was working at the office, I carefully placed the doctored tube back under the driver's seat of his BMW. Exactly where I'd found it, in exactly the same position. But this time, instead of feeling nauseated and heartbroken, I felt something entirely different. I felt powerful. I felt in control. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was the one setting the agenda instead of just responding to David's lies and manipulation. If they wanted to use my home for their betrayal, they were about to learn what that really cost. If they wanted to flaunt their affair in my driveway, they were going to discover just how public their next encounter would become. All I had to do now was wait. Wait for Wednesday. Wait for their next scheduled rendezvous. Wait for justice to literally bind them together in the most humiliating way possible. Trap was set. The hunters had become the hunted. And I was about to give them a lesson in consequences they would never, ever forget. The next 4 days were the longest of my entire life. Longer than labor with my miscarriage 7 years ago. Longer than waiting for David's job interview results that determined whether we could afford our house. Longer than any Christmas Eve when I was a child. 'Cause this time I knew exactly what was coming. I knew the trap was set, the adhesive was waiting, and Wednesday's rendezvous would be their last carefree encounter. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Tuesday night, David came home from work acting completely normal. He kissed my cheek, asked about my day, complimented the dinner I'd spent 2 hours preparing. He even suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. I sat next to him on our couch, his arm around my shoulders, watching some romantic comedy he'd picked, and I felt like I was sitting next to a stranger. This man who was cuddling with me, who was laughing at the jokes, who was playing the devoted husband, this same man was planning to betray me again in less than 16 hours. Cognitive dissonance was staggering. How could someone compartmentalize their life so completely? How could he touch me, smile at me, pretend to love me, all while planning his next sexual encounter with our housekeeper? Around midnight, as we were getting ready for bed, a wave of doubt crashed over me like ice water. What if I was wrong? What if the adhesive was too strong, too dangerous? What if someone got seriously injured? What if this crossed the line from justice into genuine harm? I stood in our bathroom, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection in the mirror, and for a moment I almost talked myself out of the whole plan. The woman looking back at me looked tired, older than her 43 years, with lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. Was this who I wanted to become? Someone who set traps and planned elaborate revenge schemes? Someone who could cause physical harm to another person, even someone who'd betrayed me so deeply? But then David came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist, kissing my neck. "I love you, sweetheart," he murmured against my skin. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." The lies. The absolute shameless lies. He could look me in the eye, touch me intimately, whisper declarations of love, all while planning to meet Maria tomorrow for another round of adultery in our driveway. My doubt evaporated like morning dew. This man had made his choices. Maria had made her choices. They decided that my feelings, my marriage, my home, my life didn't matter. They decided that their sexual gratification was worth destroying everything I'd built over 15 years. Now they were going to learn about consequences. Real consequences. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, which seemed appropriately ominous. David left for work at his usual time, kissing me goodbye with the same casual affection he'd shown every morning for years. I watched his BMW pull out of our driveway and wondered if he had any idea this would be the last normal morning of his life. 10:30 a.m. I positioned myself in our upstairs bedroom, the one with the perfect view of the driveway. I'd prepared my excuse in advance. I was organizing closets, a project that would explain why I was upstairs and might not hear anything happening outside immediately. But I would hear. Our bedroom window was slightly open, and sound carried clearly from the driveway to our second floor. If David and Maria's encounter went as I expected, the entire neighborhood would hear. At exactly 11:45 a.m., Maria's Honda pulled into our driveway. 15 minutes early, just like last week. She was wearing another inappropriate outfit, a red dress that hugged every curve, heels that were definitely not for housework, and makeup that looked like she was heading to a cocktail party instead of cleaning bathrooms. She used her key to enter our house, and I could hear her moving around downstairs. But she wasn't cleaning. There was no vacuum running, no sound of supplies being moved around. Just footsteps, water running briefly, and then silence. She was getting ready. Preparing herself for my husband. 12:10 p.m. David's BMW turned into our driveway. My heart started racing, but not with anxiety this time. With anticipation. With the electric thrill of knowing that justice was about to be served in the most poetic way imaginable. I watched David get out of his car, look around the neighborhood to make sure no one was watching, then walk toward our house with the confident stride of a man who believed he was getting away with the perfect crime. Maria met him at the front door. Even from my upstairs window, I could see the hungry way they embraced, the way David's hands immediately went to her body, the way she pressed against him like she was trying to climb inside his skin. They kissed for what felt like forever, right there on our front porch where any neighbor could see them. The audacity still took my breath away. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. They thought they were safe, thought their secret was secure, thought stupid little housewife me would never figure out what they were doing. Then they walked toward David's car, arms around each other, whispering and laughing like teenagers sneaking away from school. This was it. This was the moment I'd been planning for, waiting for, dreaming about for almost a week. David opened the driver's side door and got in. Maria walked around to the passenger side, her hips swaying in that red dress, her heels clicking on our concrete driveway. I held my breath as she got into the car and closed the door. Through the car windows, I could see their silhouettes moving closer together, could see David reaching toward the glove compartment, could see him pulling out the small tube that would destroy both their lives. The waiting was over. Trap was sprung. All I had to do now was listen for the screaming to begin. 12:23 p.m. the screaming started. I will never, for the rest of my life, forget the sound that came from David's BMW. It wasn't just one voice, it was two people screaming in absolute terror and agony, their voices harmonizing in a symphony of panic that could probably be heard 3 blocks away. Help me! Oh God, help me! That was Maria, her voice pitched so high it was almost inhuman. What the hell? What the hell is happening? That was David, and even through his panic I could hear the bewilderment, the complete inability to understand what had gone so catastrophically wrong. From my bedroom window I could see the car rocking violently as they struggled inside. The windows were fogging up from their panicked breathing, but I could still make out their silhouettes thrashing around in what had to be the most compromising and humiliating position imaginable. I can't move. I can't move. Maria was sobbing now, her voice breaking with hysteria. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. David was cursing non-stop, a string of profanity that would make a sailor blush. But underneath the anger, I could hear something else in his voice. Fear. Real, genuine terror as he realized that whatever was happening to them wasn't something they could simply walk away from. Commotion was loud enough to wake the dead. Within 60 seconds, I could see neighbors starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the sounds of distress coming from our usually quiet street. Mrs. Patterson from next door was the first to appear, still in her bathrobe and slippers. She stood on her front porch, staring at David's car with her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. Then came the Johnsons from across the street, both of them jogging over in their workout clothes. Mr. Johnson approached the car cautiously, probably trying to figure out if this was some kind of medical emergency or domestic violence situation. Hello? Are you okay in there? Mr. Johnson called out, knocking on the driver's side window. Do you need help? Call 911. David screamed from inside the car. Call an ambulance. Something's gone wrong, really wrong. That was my cue. Time to make my grand entrance as the concerned, unsuspecting wife. I ran downstairs, through the front door, and into our driveway with the best panicked expression I could manage. Which wasn't difficult, considering my heart was racing with adrenaline and barely contained satisfaction. What's happening? What's all the noise? I called out, looking around at my neighbors with wide, confused eyes. I was upstairs organizing closets when I heard screaming. Mrs. Patterson rushed over to me, her face pale with concern. Oh, honey, I think your husband might be having some kind of medical emergency in his car. And there's someone with him, I think it's your housekeeper? I blinked rapidly, as if trying to process this information. Maria's here? But why would David be? I thought he was at work. I thought she was cleaning inside. More neighbors were arriving now. The Hendersons, the Clarks, even Mr. Kim from the end of the street. A small crowd was forming around David's car, everyone trying to figure out what was happening, but no one quite brave enough to look directly through the windows. Someone needs to call 911, Mrs. Johnson said, already pulling out her phone. They sound like they're in serious trouble. Inside the car, the screaming had evolved into something even more pathetic. Maria was crying hysterically, making sounds that were half sob, half shriek. David was still cursing, but now it was interspersed with what sounded like prayers. Please, God, please let this be some kind of nightmare, I heard him moan. This can't be real. This cannot be real. The 911 operator must have answered Mrs. Johnson's call because she started speaking rapidly into her phone. Yes, we need an ambulance at 247 Maple Street. 2 people appear to be trapped in a car, possibly stuck together somehow. They're both conscious and screaming, but we can't get them out. Tucked together. The phrase sent a thrill of vindication through my chest. Pro-Bond adhesive was working exactly as advertised. Within 6 minutes, the first emergency vehicle arrived. A fire truck, followed immediately by an ambulance, their sirens wailing and lights flashing like this was the scene of a major disaster. Which, from David and Maria's perspective, it absolutely was. Paramedics approached the car professionally, but I could see the confusion on their faces as they tried to assess the situation. One of them knocked on the window and asked David to unlock the doors. "I can't reach the button," David screamed back. "I can't move my hands. We're stuck together." "Stuck together how?" the paramedic called back, his voice skeptical. We're... David's voice broke with humiliation. "We're physically attached. Something went wrong with the... He couldn't even say it. Couldn't admit in front of all these people what they'd been doing when the adhesive activated. But Maria had no such restraint. Her panic had completely overridden her shame. "The lubricant," she screamed. Something was wrong with the lubricant. Turned into glue. "We're glued together. Help us." Crowd of neighbors went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on our driveway. Everyone was staring at the car, processing what Maria had just revealed, putting together the pieces of what they were witnessing. My husband and our housekeeper. Trapped in his car. In our driveway. In the middle of the day. Glued together by what was supposed to be personal lubricant. The implications were unmistakable, and the humiliation was complete. One of the paramedics stepped back from the car and spoke quietly into his radio. "We're going to need additional units. And probably a privacy screen. This is not a standard medical emergency." Mr. Johnson was staring at me with an expression of dawning understanding and sympathy. "Oh, Lydia," he said softly. "I'm so sorry." Mrs. Patterson took my arm gently. "Honey, maybe you should go inside. You don't need to see this. But I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. This was my moment. This was justice being served with a precision I never could have planned. David and Maria, exposed in front of our entire neighborhood, trapped in the most humiliating position possible, facing consequences that would follow them for the rest of their lives. "I don't understand," I said, my voice shaking with what everyone assumed was shock and betrayal. "David? Maria? What were you doing in there?" David's face appeared briefly in the car window, red with pain and mortification. When he saw me standing there surrounded by neighbors, his expression crumbled completely. He looked like a man whose entire world had just collapsed around him. Which of course it had. Paramedics were now working to cover the car windows with emergency blankets while they figured out how to extract 2 people who were literally bonded together in David's front seat. Police cars were arriving, their officers trying to disperse the growing crowd of onlookers. And through it all, Maria kept crying and David kept cursing, both of them learning exactly what it felt like to face consequences for their choices. The sweet taste of revenge had never been more satisfying. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital became the stage for the final act of my revenge drama. By 2:30 p.m., David and Maria had been successfully separated by a team of doctors, nurses, and what I can only assume was a very uncomfortable conversation about industrial adhesives and their effects on human skin. I played my role perfectly in that sterile waiting room. The devastated wife, clutching tissues, surrounded by sympathetic neighbors who'd insisted on driving me to the hospital. Mrs. Patterson sat on one side of me, rubbing my back and murmuring comforting words. Sarah Mitchell had arrived within 20 minutes of my text message, positioning herself as my emotional support system. "I just don't understand how this happened," I kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "David said he was at work. Maria was supposed to be cleaning our house. How did they end up together in his car? Police officer assigned to take statements looked like he'd rather be investigating literally any other crime. Officer Rodriguez was probably in his mid-30s, professional but clearly uncomfortable with the intimate details he was being forced to document. Mrs. Richardson, I need to ask you some questions about the events leading up to this incident, he said, settling into the plastic chair across from me. When did you last see your husband this morning? He left for work at 7:45, just like always, I said, my voice trembling with practiced emotion. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd be home for dinner. I had no idea he was planning to come back during the day. And when did you realize something was wrong? When I heard the screaming from our driveway. I was upstairs organizing our bedroom closets, and suddenly there was all this noise. I ran outside and found our neighbors gathering around David's car. Officer Rodriguez made notes, his expression growing more uncomfortable with each detail. Mrs. Richardson, are you aware of any relationship between your husband and Maria Santos beyond her employment as your housekeeper? That was my opening. The moment I'd been waiting for since this whole nightmare began. Officer Rodriguez, I said, my voice becoming stronger, more controlled. I need to tell you something. I've suspected David was having an affair for weeks now, but I didn't know it was with Maria until recently. The waiting room went quiet. Mrs. Patterson's hand froze on my back. Sarah leaned forward with interest. Even the other families in the waiting area stopped their conversations to listen. You suspected an affair? Officer Rodriguez asked, his pen poised over his notepad. More than suspected, I said, reaching into my purse. I have proof. From my carefully organized purse, I pulled out a manila folder that contained weeks of detective work. Credit card statements, printed call logs, hotel receipts, and photographs I'd taken of Maria's new jewelry and clothing. These are hotel charges on days when David claimed to be at the office, I said, spreading the credit card statements across the waiting room table. Here are purchases from Tiffany & Company and Victoria's Secret that I never received. This is Maria's phone number, written in David's handwriting, along with meeting times and locations. Officer Rodriguez examined the documents with growing interest. Mrs. Richardson, this suggests you've been investigating your husband's activities for some time. I have been. And I found this under the seat of his car 3 weeks ago. I pulled out a small evidence bag containing the original tube of personal lubricant. This is what led me to realize they were using David's car for their encounters. I also have photographs of them together, taken from my neighbor's kitchen window. The waiting room was dead silent now. Everyone was staring at me, processing the fact that the devastated wife they'd been comforting was actually a woman who'd been methodically gathering evidence against her cheating husband. Mrs. Richardson, Officer Rodriguez said carefully, did you have any involvement in the substance that caused today's incident? Before I could answer, the waiting room doors burst open and David appeared in a hospital gown, his face red and raw from the medical removal process. His expression was a mixture of rage, humiliation, and desperation. Lydia, thank God you're here, he said, rushing toward me with his arms outstretched. This whole thing has been a nightmare. There was something wrong with the product. Some kind of manufacturing defect. Our lawyers are going to destroy the company that made it. I stood up slowly, looking him directly in the eyes. Manufacturing defect, David? Really? That's the story you're going with? David's face faltered. Something in my tone, in my expression, was clearly not what he'd expected from his traumatized wife. What do you mean? He asked, but his voice was already losing confidence. I mean, David, that there was no manufacturing defect. My voice was steady, cold, and loud enough for everyone in the waiting room to hear. I replaced your lubricant with industrial construction adhesive 3 days ago. The silence that followed was deafening. David's mouth fell open, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. You what? He whispered. I found your little love nest supplies 3 weeks ago, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. I spent 2 weeks watching you lie to my face while you planned your encounters with Maria in our driveway. So I decided to teach you both a lesson about consequences." Mrs. Patterson gasped. Sarah was grinning openly. Officer Rodriguez was scribbling notes frantically, clearly realizing this case had just taken a very different turn. "You did this on purpose?" David's voice was rising toward hysteria. "You could have killed us." "I researched it thoroughly," I said calmly. "Probond industrial construction adhesive. Non-toxic but fast-acting. I knew it would require medical intervention to separate you, but I also knew it wouldn't cause permanent physical harm. Unlike your affair, which has permanently damaged our marriage, our home, and our entire life together." Sarah stood up then, positioning herself next to me in a show of solidarity. "Officer, I can corroborate Mrs. Richardson's story about discovering the affair. She came to me weeks ago with evidence of her husband's infidelity. I also helped her obtain the adhesive she used." "You helped her?" Officer Rodriguez looked between Sarah and me with something approaching admiration. "David Richardson has been flaunting his affair in front of the entire neighborhood," Sarah said firmly. "Using his own driveway for sexual encounters while his wife was inside their home. If you ask me, he got exactly what he deserved." By now, a small crowd had gathered in the waiting room. Other patients, family members, and hospital staff were all listening to our conversation with fascination. David was looking around at all these faces, realizing that his humiliation was only getting worse. "This is assault," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She deliberately caused us physical harm. I want her arrested." Officer Rodriguez looked at David with undisguised disdain. "Sir, you were trespassing on your own property with another woman while your wife was home. You were using someone else's purchased product for sexual activity. And you're claiming to be the victim here?" That's when Maria finally appeared, wheeled out in a hospital wheelchair by a nurse who looked like she'd seen everything but had never seen anything quite like this. Maria's face was swollen and red, her expensive dress replaced by a hospital gown, her perfect hair disheveled and matted. When she saw the crowd in the waiting room, when she realized that everyone was staring at her, when she understood that her secret affair was now the most public story in our entire neighborhood, she started crying again. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Richardson," she sobbed. "I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to hurt you." I looked down at her with complete calm. "Maria, you made a choice. You chose to have an affair with my husband in my home using my driveway on my time. Now you're experiencing the consequences of that choice. I hope it was worth it." The nurse pushing Maria's wheelchair looked between all of us and shook her head. "In 20 years of emergency medicine, I have never seen anything like this," she said. "Two people glued together in a car because the wife switched out their supplies. This is going to be a story we tell for decades." And that's when I realized the most beautiful part of my revenge. This wasn't just about David and Maria learning a lesson. This was about creating a story so outrageous, so perfectly poetic, that it would follow them wherever they went for the rest of their lives. "Officer Rodriguez," I said, gathering up my evidence folder. "I assume you'll need to investigate this further. But I want you to know that I don't regret anything I've done. My husband and our employee betrayed me in the most humiliating way possible. I simply gave them a taste of their own medicine." David slumped into a waiting room chair, his head in his hands. Maria was still crying. Crowd was still staring. And me? For the first time in months, I felt completely, utterly victorious. Justice had been served, and it was everything I dreamed it would be. 3 months later, I'm sitting in what is now officially my house, sipping coffee from my favorite mug, watching the morning sun stream through windows that finally feel clean again. Not because of any housekeeper, but because I cleaned them myself with my own hands, restoring the clarity that had been missing from my life for far too long. The legal consequences came swiftly and decisively. David moved out that same evening, spending his first night as a separated man in a hotel room that he had to pay for with his own credit card instead of hiding the charges from his unsuspecting wife. Within a week, my lawyer had filed divorce papers citing adultery, emotional cruelty, and irreconcilable differences. David tried to fight me on the settlement, claiming I'd committed assault and didn't deserve anything from our marriage. His lawyer quickly explained that a man caught having an affair in his own driveway, with documented evidence of financial infidelity and emotional abandonment, was not in a position to make demands about who deserved what. I kept the house. I kept half of everything we'd built together over 15 years. Most importantly, I kept my dignity and my self-respect. Maria Santos was fired immediately, obviously. But beyond that, I made sure she understood that she was permanently banned from our property, our neighborhood, and frankly, our lives. The last I heard, she'd moved back to her family in another state, probably tired of being recognized everywhere she went as the woman who got glued to someone else's husband. The story spread through our community like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew about the cheating husband, the industrial adhesive, and the wife who'd orchestrated the most creative revenge our quiet suburb had ever witnessed. Some people were horrified by what I'd done. Others were secretly impressed. Most were just grateful for the entertainment. I discovered something interesting about myself during those first weeks after David left. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't the helpless, dependent woman I'd somehow become over 8 years of subordinating my dreams to his career. Instead, I felt lighter, stronger, but more myself than I'd been in years. Without David's schedule to manage, his clothes to iron, his dinner parties to host, I had time to remember who I used to be before I became Mrs. David Richardson. I started taking walks in the morning, something I hadn't done since college. I called old friends from my marketing days, reconnecting with women who'd built impressive careers while I was polishing silver and planning menus. Most surprisingly, I started getting job offers. Apparently, the marketing skills I'd thought were obsolete were actually more valuable than ever. Companies needed people who understood how to create compelling narratives, how to manage complex logistics, how to turn ordinary situations into memorable experiences. Who knew that 15 years of event planning and relationship management had been preparing me for a career comeback? 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I accepted a position as marketing director for a boutique consulting firm downtown. My first day back in an office after 8 years felt like coming home to myself. Sarah Mitchell became my closest confidant through the entire process. She'd call every evening to check on me, bring wine when I needed to vent, and celebrate each small victory in my new life. Having a friend who understood both betrayal and survival made all the difference. "You know what I admire most about what you did?" Sarah said one evening as we sat on my back deck, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sunset. "It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. They disrespected your home, your marriage, your life, and you made sure the consequences matched the violation." She was right. That's exactly what I'd done. I hadn't just lashed out in anger or pain. I'd methodically ensured that David and Maria experienced the same level of humiliation and exposure they'd inflicted on me. But more than that, I'd reclaimed my power. For months, I'd been the victim of their deception, the unknowing third party in my own marriage. The industrial adhesive plan had transformed me from victim to victor, from powerless to empowered. The neighborhood gossip eventually died down, replaced by newer scandals and fresher drama. But people still nod at me with a certain respect when I walk down our street. They know I'm not someone to underestimate. They know I'm not the kind of woman who accepts betrayal quietly. David and Maria's relationship didn't survive the aftermath, which honestly surprised no one. Turns out their connection was based on secrecy and excitement, not on anything substantial enough to withstand public humiliation and permanent embarrassment. Last I heard, David was living alone in a downtown apartment, Maria had left the state, and neither of them could use personal lubricant without having flashbacks to the most humiliating day of their lives. The poetic justice of that still makes me smile. On quiet evenings, when I'm cooking dinner for one in my peaceful kitchen, I sometimes think about the woman I used to be. The woman who would have confronted David and Maria directly, who would have cried and pleaded and begged for explanations. The woman who would have blamed herself for not being enough, for not keeping her husband satisfied, for failing as a wife. That woman is gone. In her place is someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who might think about taking advantage of her kindness. I'm not saying what I did was perfect. I'm not claiming it was the only solution. But I am saying that sometimes when someone violates your home, your trust, and your life so completely, they deserve to experience consequences that are equally unforgettable. Ladies, if you're watching this story and you've experienced betrayal in your own life, I want you to remember something important. You are not powerless. You are not helpless. You are not required to accept disrespect, infidelity, or humiliation just because you love someone. You have choices. You have strength. You have the ability to ensure that people who hurt you remember exactly why they shouldn't have. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Give us a like if you enjoyed this story. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see new life stories that I highly recommend. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.